welcome to the Parliamentary Pavilion. My name is Malini Mehra and I'm Chief Executive of Globe International. We're delighted to welcome you to today's session, and it's going to be looking at the role of young people and parliamentarians in particular, and a very interesting new initiative on finance. So of course the theme for today is youth, children, education and skills. We're bringing them all together around the subject of finance, and we have two wonderful members of parliament who have been involved in this unique initiative. I'm going to turn to the first one, Sahar Al-Bazar, who is a member of parliament from Egypt, and Sahar is going to be explaining the Ubuntu Youth Parliamentarians Initiative on Climate Finance. And then we are going to have Madame Ajijiara Mergan Kanouete, who is a member of parliament from the Parliament of Senegal, who's going to be explaining her role in this initiative. We are going to be bilingual, so please do bear with us. We don't have a translator with us, so I will do my best to translate as needed. But let's start with you, Sahar. Tell us about this initiative.
Thank you, Melanie, and thanks for Globe International for hosting this event and giving us the platform to talk about our initiative as young parliamentarians. Well, the Ubuntu initiative, I'll start by saying what's the meaning of Ubuntu. Ubuntu is a South African phrase that means I am because you are, and we chose this name because we wanted to signify the meaning of humanity when it comes to climate change, and that we are all in this together. So it started right after the spring meetings in Washington, like around March 2022. And then we had parliamentary meetings with the World Bank and IMF, and they were telling us how these financial institutions can help our countries. But they didn't really stress on the debt issue for our countries. That's where the idea came, and we started and launched the initiative by four parliamentarians. I'm from Egypt, and from Senegal, and from Ghana and Indonesia. And the four of us, we had this petition that we're calling for three main things. The first one is we're asking the financial institutions for more debt swaps in focus of climate change adaptation. The second thing is to suspend the debt service on our countries so we can use the debt service money in projects for climate adaptation. And the third thing is to have a common framework for the lower middle income countries, similar to the G20 framework for the lower income countries. Yeah. So these are the three demands that we were calling for. And by time, the World Bank and the senior management of the World Bank, they heard our voices, and the vice president, he invited us to meet him in the annual meetings in Marrakesh this year. So we met with him, and he heard our demands, and he promised an unwavering support for the young parliamentarians. And then we also pitched it to the Secretary General of the UNFCCC, who thankfully gave us a big platform here in COP28 to continue advocating. And we can see the progress. So I have to mention that this is not only the work of Ubuntu or the young parliamentarians. The advocacy for this has been there for years. So we see the progress now. We see that in June 2022, in Paris Summit, it was announced through the new president of the World Bank that the islands who faces the climate crises and natural crises, they will be pardoned or exempt or paused on their loan payment. This COP, the World Bank announced in the 1st of December, once we arrived, announced that the small states will also have the same leverage. There are going to be pauses on loans, and there are going to be pauses on interest of loans. This kind of progress is hopeful for us, and we are going to continue pushing for more because we want to make sure that the lower middle income countries are not forgotten from these benefits that are given. Lastly, the international financial institutions, when they take such decisions, they are taking it in categorizing the countries by economic situation and GDP. Like they are categorizing us as lower income countries or lower middle income countries. but not with the vulnerability of the climate change. And this is a very important point that we are addressing, because you might be a lower income country, but you are not vulnerable as a lower middle income country. So this country that is most vulnerable is the most eligible for the kind of support and decisions by the financial institutions. So this is all about the Ubuntu initiative, and I'm so looking forward for our discussion today and to learn together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sahar. And please keep the mic and hand it over to Madame Kanute so we can have her perspective on her role in this initiative.
Bonjour. Je voudrais saluer tout le monde. Thanks to the Global International. Thanks to you also, Watini, and to our president. She is our president of our initiative. Elle a expliqué, she explained very good how we will take place the initiative. Elle a expliqué comment cette initiative a vu le jour, où il y a le Sénégal, l'Égypte, le Ghana, également l'Indonésie. Comme vous le savez, les changements climatiques favorisent des problèmes. Des problèmes à des conséquences économiques et non économiques. Et les problèmes économiques, c'est relatif à la disparition de localités, de villages, la disparition donc de localités, également à des conséquences néfastes sur nos terres, notamment la fertilité de nos terres, favorise la salinisation, également pour la pêche, la raréfaction des poissons, on ne trouve plus de poissons, et au niveau de la santé aussi, il y a des conséquences sanitaires, notamment cela favorise les maladies comme le choléra, entre autres maladies, donc cela affecte la santé des communautés.
Un instant, je vais traduire. D'accord. So Madame Kanute has welcomes everybody. She's also recognized the work of you, Sahar, as the president. She reiterates the fact that there are these four countries which are involved in this initiative, so Senegal, Egypt, Ghana, and Indonesia. And from the perspective of Senegal, she has noted the particular implications of climate change, which are both economic as well as non-economic. So in terms of the gravest consequences, the impacts of climate change on Senegal, they range from the impacts on the land, the quality of the land, salinization, the impact on fisheries in particular, and with the salinization of the land on agriculture, and in particular on health. So both of these issues are issues, and I'm just adding to what you're saying, of course, food, fisheries, health are new issues at COP. So please proceed, Madame Kanute.
Okay, thank you. Aussi, nous avons véritablement pensé qu'il serait important que la dette, les dettes de certains pays, les pays où il y a des conséquences néfastes, aussi bien économiques que sanitaires, que ces pays-là puissent bénéficier de ce qu'on appelle l'éponge de la dette. Parce que cela nous permettrait d'injecter l'argent de la dette au niveau du climat. Parce qu'aujourd'hui, c'est vrai que le Sénégal est l'un des premiers pays en Afrique à mettre en place le budget vert. Et dernièrement, avec la session à l'Assemblée nationale, nous sommes revenus sur le budget vert et le Sénégal en est le premier qui a expérimenté cela. Et nous voulons inviter véritablement les bailleurs à nous appuyer à ce que la dette puisse aller dans des secteurs clés, notamment pour le climat.
Merci, je vais traduire. D'accord. So, Madame Kanute has mentioned in terms of the economic context for Senegal in addressing climate change is very much influenced by the high debt level, the high levels of debt that the country faces. But the country is also unique in the African continent for being the first which has introduced a green budget. And this is thanks to the leadership of organizations as well as members of parliament. But in order to act on that, there is a need to ensure that the debt crisis is also acted on.
Voilà, exactement. Je pense que c'est la même situation que vit l'Égypte. Et c'est la même situation donc, que vit beaucoup de pays africains. Donc c'est important que ces pays soient accompagnés, soient soutenus et que cette dette-là puisse être injectée dans des secteurs clés, prioritaires, notamment donc, en ce qui concerne le climat, vu les changements climatiques qui impactent négativement la santé des populations, qui impactent négativement l'économie, parce qu'effectivement, il y a beaucoup de commerces qui ferment, qui sont fermés, parce que avec le phénomène des inondations, les localités pataugent dans l'eau.
Thank you. So she's noted the similarities that there are in terms of the debt context with Egypt and other countries across Africa, and also pointed out the impacts of climate change, certainly on health, but also on the local economy, where as a result of floods, local traders and smallholders have been affected, so their livelihoods have been affected by this. So it's critically important to get a handle on the issue of debt to address climate action.
Yes. Okay.
So let's bring it back to you. So Sahar, you have given us a general outline of what the campaign's objectives are. To add some context to it, you've mentioned that there's been quite a lot of work which has been going on to reform the international financial institutions so that they can begin to address the real needs of different categories of countries, from the heavily indebted and the vulnerable, the least developing. So there are lots of different categories and a lot has been happening. I'm just wondering how much your campaign has aligned with the calls of initiatives such as the Bridgetown Initiative, where the attention, again, to debt has been quite significant.
So thanks for the question. And actually, as I mentioned in my introduction, that the Secretary General of the UNFCCC gave us a space to advocate, and one of the speakers with us was the representative of Bridgetown Initiative. He was like the master brain behind Bridgetown, and he thankfully showed the similarities and how Barbados was one of the countries that benefited from the debt swaps, which is, I think it's quite rare, because the World Bank and the IMF, they didn't do a lot of debt swaps. That's why we are continuing the pushing for increasing the debt swaps. That's for your question regarding Bridgetown. You want me to elaborate more on the efforts of others?
Yeah, so I think it's really good to get a sense of how the work that you're doing as members of parliament is coming together with the work that's being done by many other organizations, because you have shared aims.
Yes, we do have shared aims. And our parliamentary work is to make sure that our MPs are also speaking to their own governments and pushing them. And here I want to thank different parliaments, because in the Climate Week in Kenya, we had the chance to officially launch the initiative inside the Kenyan parliament while the speaker is attending. And then after that, the Irish Parliament, they also discussed the Ubuntu inside the Parliament of Ireland, and they asked their government to endorse and support the initiative, and to talk to the financial institutions about our demands and lobby with us. And also the Mexican Parliament. And now there are talks with the British Parliament, and we hope they are going to discuss it in their parliament very soon. And this is how we see the ripple effect, and this is how we want to continue our unique lobbying, because other groups, they lobby together like civil societies. They talk with the international organizations. Part of the governments, they also speak to the some of the countries' governments. They speak with the international organizations. But that was the first, I think, parliamentary network that speaks with the international organizations and inside their own national and federal parliaments. So I feel like now maybe we have all the players and the stakeholders in this cause with these shared goals and objectives are working together and complementing each other.
Thank you. And Madame Kanute, your thoughts? Vous voulez ajouter quelque chose?
Oui, ce que je veux ajouter, moi je renforce, je renforce ce que vient de dire ma présidente. Donc j'y adhère totalement aussi également. Et que nous devons porter ensemble un plaidoyer fort pour que véritablement que nous puissions être appuyés pour pouvoir financer tout ce qui touche au climat, les changements climatiques, pour pouvoir véritablement donc mettre fin à toutes ces conséquences néfastes, à toutes ces conséquences négatives sur les communautés.
Merci. So, Madame Kanute has reinforced the points that you have made and added the dimension of not forgetting the impact at the ground level of the communities of all of this. Let me follow up with another question. Typically, in the past, when we have had IMF, World Bank-led initiatives on debt cancellation, they've been accompanied by a range of conditionalities. Because what you don't want to do is to increase jeopardy within the system of entering into debt cancellation agreements where the country is simply let off, so to speak. Yeah? Because that sends a signal to others that you don't have to honor your commitments. And then that's also risky for the country because it implies that there are challenges in maintaining financial discipline and fiscal discipline. So you've mentioned the importance of using vulnerability as an index in identifying countries which need assistance, as special assistance. But how do you address the issue of jeopardy and country risk?
Can you translate your question?
Donc, j'avais ajouté que dans l'histoire de ce type de nature de debt swap, les fonds internationaux, ils ont appliqué les conditionnalités sur les pays pour éviter la chose que le faiblesse de le système fiscal national devenu un risque pour le pays. Donc, qu'est-ce que l'histoire au Sénégal, par exemple, pour éviter ce risque fiscal? Je ne sais pas si j'ai expliqué tout ça en français, mais donc, back to you.
Okay. So I want to highlight that governments and financial institutions and our initiative, we are partners and we look for the win-win for everyone. So accountability of the governments is a must. And also protecting the financial institutions is a must. Because if we canceled all the debts, how the financial institutions have money so they can give other countries? And if countries, they started to rely on climate, on canceling the debts and just avoid their commitments, they will be labeled like as red countries and they cannot be taken any future loans. So we're jeopardizing this country's future and we're jeopardizing the financial institutions' capital and future in giving more loans. So in our proposal and in our talks with experts like the special envoy for Bridgetown initiative, it was clear that whenever a country wants to take that step, they should go with a very well-written, studied, very detailed proposal to the financial institutions. I'm asking you for canceling this debt, or I'm asking you for a suspension for the service of this debt, because these are the reasons 1, 2, 3, and because I'm going to use this money for that project 1, 2, 3 with a time frame of X and Y, and it will yield amount of money that I will be using on a climate change adaptation project that it's equal X and Y, whatever the name is, and we have partners and investors in this, so the financial institutions feel secured about taking the decision of whether canceling or suspending the debt service on these countries. So in this way, we are holding governments the responsibility of choosing which debt to cancel or choosing which debt that they are going to negotiate the suspension of its interest. And among our discussions, uh, we reached the conclusion that the best loans that we should talk about it with the financial institutions are the loans with the highest interest rate for the countries. So once the country decide and select the highest interest loan, and they want to either request cancellation or suspension for the interest rate, they have to have a very detailed proposal going to the financial institutions, and then the financial institution has the liberty to decide based on the funds that they have. But in the case, for example, again, Barbados, it was successful and it was approved because they did their homework. So that's how we can hold governments accountable, and we protect also the financial institutions.
Thank you. Madam?
Same question.
Oui. Oui. D'accord. CDS, non? Ok. Oui, oui, oui. Merci beaucoup. Voilà, donc les pays et les institutions financières, c'est des relations de partenariat. C'est des relations, gagnant-gagnant. Elle a dit win-win. Aujourd'hui, je l'ai dit tantôt, le Sénégal a mis en place le budget vert. C'est la première fois qu'un pays africain met en place le budget vert. Et c'est extrêmement important. Je pense que aussi que nous devons être les partenaires, les institutions financières. C'est vrai que toute la dette ne peut pas être épongée d'un coup, mais par secteur, par projet, on peut véritablement prendre l'argent destiné de la dette, destiner cela à un projet. Par exemple, à un projet climatique. Parce qu'aujourd'hui, comme on l'a dit tantôt, les problèmes climatiques posent énormément de conséquences néfastes sur la population, donc que ce soit la population sénégalaise, que ce soit la population africaine et même au-delà. Je pense que nous avons beaucoup plus... aujourd'hui, la dette du Sénégal tourne autour de plus de 1200 et quelques milliards. Donc c'est énorme. Je pense que... et c'est valable également pour tous les autres pays africains qui sont endettés et qui luttent, qui portent les plaidoyers et qui luttent pour véritablement trouver des solutions pour les changes relatifs au changement climatique.
Merci. Alors, so Madame Kanute, to build on what you have said, uses the example of Senegal, in which she says Senegal is the first country, of course, to have a green budget, and that the idea is to have the debt cancellation or suspension on the basis of a sector-by-sector approach or a project-by-project approach, so it becomes very practical. And of course, this is part of a partnership with the financial institutions and the government to ensure that the right projects are secured to deliver confidence still in the system. Go ahead. Any further?
Further comments? Well, definitely I second my dear colleague Ms. Kanute. And I want to highlight too that because I think I didn't mention it in the beginning, that our initiative has been joined by 50 countries from Global South, and Ukraine as a lower middle income country, they are also joined our initiative, which means that this initiative is calling or like speaking out of the pain of these countries. So it's a joint issue and a joint burden on these countries, and more because we're getting more countries interested to join the Ubuntu. So I feel like, as we mentioned, it's a win-win situation between countries and the financial institutions, and we need to see the financial institutions also hearing the voices and the pains of these countries, and not to wait for lower middle income countries to become lower income countries to give them this support, and not to wait to see the crisis happen and then try to pay and like relieve some money so they solve or work on this crisis after it happened. We need a proactive role. That's why I'm hopeful, and I see the signs from the IMF and the World Bank with these kind of decisions that lately released. I feel like there is a hope that the win-win situation in their own mindset will happen by taking care and not overlooking the lower middle income countries who are vulnerable from climate change. So that's my comment.
So thank you. So Sahar, to add further context to what you're saying, so in the last few years, we've seen that debt burden increase because of COVID, the impact of COVID on economies. We've seen it increase as an impact of inflation, which has increased, and food insecurity due to the conflict that we see in Ukraine. So there are many reasons why the debt burden increases. My question to you is, and again it's on this theme of ensuring that any form of debt cancellation or suspension doesn't harm the country's ability to attract investment. That's one of the biggest drawbacks of these. So in that, parliaments have a very important role, because the function that you are playing is new. Historically, there is already an ongoing dialogue between governments from ministries of finance and the fund and the bank about the debt burden. This is an ongoing conversation. There's nothing new about it. What's new is this network of parliamentarians who are effectively acting on behalf of the government, of the communities, but acting on behalf of the government. So how do you fulfill that role? You have a dual role. The first is to hold the executive to account for good financial management.
Yes.
And the second is related to that, ensure that the country's credit rating and investment ability is not downgraded because of this effort to seek debt cancellation or debt suspension.
Yeah.
So,
very interesting question, Melanie. And I have to say that even without canceling the debts or the debt service, you see countries now are being ranked lower than before, just because of the global situation. It affected everyone. And let me elaborate. Like, for example, in Egypt, we were hit by the COVID. And when we started to work on economically recover from the COVID, we were impacted by the war in Ukraine and Russia. And it impacted us because both Russia and Ukraine are the first number 1 and 2 tourists coming to Egypt, which is a hard currency source for us. And of course the wheat that we get from Ukraine and Russia, and we had to pay more to get from other countries. So we were highly impacted by this. And then we had the war on our borders in Sudan, and then another war between Israel and Palestine. And it will impact maybe the Suez Canal when it comes to the ships. So we have been around a lot of conflicts and wars and economic downsizing. So it was out of our hands. And it's similar to other countries. I'm just giving the example of Egypt because I'm a parliamentarian from there. So the international society and the financial institutions need to consider this because it's out of our hands. And we need to have kind of support in facilitating the payment. Yes, it could hurt the ranking, Yes, it could decrease the financial, the foreign investment, but we are going through the same without the cancellation and without the suspension of the debts, just because of factors that are out of our hands. It's impacting the economy overall. So I would prefer to have the ranking down while I'm having a debt cancellation or debt suspension, so I can use this money and do development in our countries, because we are threatened by the climate change. We are very vulnerable. We have Alexandria will be wiped off the map. We have the delta also, it will be wiped off the map. We have extreme heat waves that kills the crops, that we get threatened by the not having enough food security for the future generations and actually current generation. So these are threats that we need to tackle, and we need to have the enough money to tackle it. And only the financial institutions, by these decisions, can help.
Okay, thank you so much. So I'm going to take that as your final remarks. Donc, la question, il s'agit de la responsabilité du Parlement pour assurer que le gouvernement ne fait accentuer la faiblesse économique, la faiblesse fiscale, parce que ça, c'est un signe très négatif envers les marchés capitaux. Et c'est pas bon pour un pays. Donc, qu'est-ce que le rôle de parlementaire à face de ça?
Oui, d'accord. Mon français me donne d'accord. Oui. Oui. D'accord, j'ai compris. Maintenant, là également, vous avez parlé, on a fait face à plusieurs crises. Il y a eu 6 crises. Il y a la crise de la pandémie, Covid-19. Il y a eu la crise relative à l'inflation du prix du pétrole. On a eu une autre crise qui est le phénomène des inondations et qui est due au changement climatique. On a eu une autre crise qui est la crise, la ceinture de feu qui nous entoure, la violence qui est avec les coups d'État, le terrorisme, donc qui avait cours au niveau de l'Afrique de l'Ouest. Donc c'est autant de crises qui auraient pu fragiliser le Sénégal. Mais nous avons pu maintenir la croissance grâce à l'agriculture. Donc, et cette agriculture-là, aujourd'hui, avec les changements climatiques, ça pose des problèmes au niveau des terres, de la fertilisation du terre, etc. Maintenant, au niveau du Parlement, nous, en tant que parlementaires, nous portons le plaidoyer. Le plaidoyer pour que, véritablement, pour mieux protéger donc, nos terres, pour véritablement mieux protéger nos ressources halieutiques. Mais pour cela, il faut un accompagnement qui nous permettrait, bien évidemment, de faire face au changement climatique. Parce que toutes ces conséquences nous viennent donc des changements climatiques qui favorisent tout cela. Donc notre mission, notre rôle en tant que parlementaire, c'est de porter les plaidoyers. Et ici à la COP 28, il y a une bonne représentation, une bonne présence de parlementaires du Sénégal pour pouvoir ensemble porter le plaidoyer pour que effectivement que nous puissions trouver ensemble des solutions face à ces changements climatiques qui posent beaucoup de problèmes, beaucoup de conséquences néfastes au niveau de la communauté.
D'accord, merci. So, Madame Kanouté has said that Senegal, of course, has faced multiple crises. So going back, of course, the pandemic, the regional conflicts that there are, the rise in fuel bills, and it's created a situation where the economy and the society has become more fragile. So what's the role of members of parliament? So fundamentally here at COP, what they're doing is to make sure that the voices are heard, to make an appeal for decision makers here to understand the consequences of climate change in adding to the fragility of the country. So to bring the voice of the community and to make that appeal visible through the representation of a large group of members of parliament who are here at COP.
aussi pour le vote du budget, parce que vous savez, nous venons de terminer la session budgétaire. Ça fait juste une semaine. Nous avons véritablement, nous nous sommes battus pour que le budget concernant les climats soit revu à la hausse, que ce soit avec le ministère de l'Environnement, mais également d'autres ministères ou véritablement qui luttent pour les changements climatiques. Également, nous faisons partie des pays les moins pollueurs. Et dans ce cas, je pense que les pays africains moins pollueurs auraient pu être soutenus par les partenaires pour que la dette là soit véritablement épongée pour pouvoir être injectée dans des secteurs comme le climat, relatifs au climat.
Merci. And that's a very good note to end on also, because Madam Aminata has mentioned the role of the green budget. They have just concluded the budget exercise. And the need for the countries in the region also to work much more effectively together, because Senegal is ahead of many of the others because it has a budget which is also able to address climate change issues, vulnerabilities, but the need to work in partnership with other countries which are not as well endowed in this respect as Senegal. So I think ending on this theme of making sure that your voices are heard as members of parliament, very clearly aligned, and that you are bringing the voices of the communities here in your representational role. So I would like to please join me in thanking our two wonderful speakers, Madame Aji Diara Mergan Kanute, Member of Parliament from Senegal, and Sahar Al-Bazar, Member of Parliament from Egypt. Thank you for your leadership, both of you.